Welcome to the podcast today, everyone. Mondo Gonzalez here with Gary Stearman, and we are going to be talking about some fun stuff. Kind of a continuation, Gary, of where we were a couple weeks ago in looking at Ezekiel 36 and 37, the dry bones vision. But before we do, I want to remind everybody that if you are watching this or you're listening to this and you have the opportunity to subscribe to the channel, please do. It is always helpful for the algorithms to get the word out. I also want to share that we just got back from our Colorado Springs conference. It was a great time, almost 1,000 people there, and many more on through live stream. And we are gearing up to go to our next conference, which is December 5th through 8th in Branson, Missouri. ChristmasinBranson.com. It's going to be a great time at the Chateau on the lake there. The hotel there is really phenomenal. They decorate it so awesome for Christmas. So check that out, ChristmasinBranson.com. And it'll be post-election.
Uh-huh.
So there'll be a lot to discuss. And Gary, you might make your way out to Branson to join us.
I will try. As you know, Mondo, I'm kind of in a recovery mode. The Lord has really given me another look at life since that heart problem. And I'm making my way back, so I'm looking forward to being there, if possible.
If possible. You have no guarantees, but it's drivable, which is always nice.
Yeah.
Not quite as close as Norman, where we got to see you, but Branson, at least for us, is 4 hours away. Not too bad, but it's a very beautiful place. I mean, and I imagine people would love to either come early or stay late to join it. And I think this will be an interesting conference because
Yes.
There'll be a lot to discuss again post-election. Hopefully, things will be decided by a month later, and there won't be. I think back to the year of the hanging Chad. Back in the year 2000.
Never forget that.
Yeah, that wasn't. Things were not. They were not decided for a while until the courts got involved. But, anyways, nevertheless, please join us there. It'll be a great time, and again, the Lord's revealing a lot of things. And on that note, Gary, we, again, as we mentioned, we a couple of weeks ago, we started getting into the mystery of Israel and how it's become a nation. And Ezekiel 38, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty on this and some of the names and just the setup. But before we do that, give me your sense. You've been watching this for a long time, the nation Israel, the latest developments, again, Hamas, Psalm 83. So what's your sense of what's happening right now at this very moment in Israel?
Well, I would say instability is the key word. And when I read the Bible and read latter-day events, what I see is that the world grows increasingly unstable as the day approaches. And the day is the day of the Lord. And we, Christians, I think faithful Christians, have somewhere in their thinking or in their heart, they have the idea that based on prophecy they've studied with us here at Prophecy Watchers, that the latter days will be characterized by decreasing stability. And we certainly see that in Europe now, going all the way back to the 30s and then World War II. We went through one period of great instability, which ushered the Jews into the land in the 40s, and then 1948. And you talk about instability or instability. Hitler's Third Reich characterized that to a T, and it was based on hatred of the Jews. Fast forward to where we are right now, hatred of the Jews. And another group of powers coming after the Jews, and it seems to me we're almost repeating what happened in the 30s and 40s. And you read prophecy, Mondo, and you see that God uses the hatred of Israel's opponents to move Israel to the next step in prophetic fulfillment. So that's the way I look at what's going on right now. We're moving to that next step, and we have to temper our thinking because we want to rush ahead and let's get this thing done. But no, God has His own speed, His own way of doing things, And, well, the rapture's got to be soon, right? Well, it could be. But again, we can't rush. And that's where we are right now. We look at Turkey, which we'll be talking about a little bit later, north of Israel. We look at Iran, northeast of Israel, and we see people talking and planning and plotting and counting their weapons and figuring out where they fit in relative to the great Western power, the United States, which, by the way, is becoming destabilized. So you put all this together, and I have my Bible open to Ezekiel 38, and I'm seeing that instability. And it's topped off by Gog, and I think almost everybody, and I'll ask you your opinion, almost everybody says, well, this is latter-day Russia. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that it's hard to avoid the idea that Russia is involved here, the land of Magog, and we'll get into some of the names. And I think that as it relates to instability, we know that God's goal is to save Israel, and that's what He's going to do. And but we also know that the Israel that we see today in the land, it's like reading the Book of Kings, because you have Israel doing their own thing, or even the Book of Judges is an example that they, as a nation, remember, people got to remember this, that God often deals with Israel based on their leadership. So in the Old Testament, when you had a bad king, obviously the bad king would have bad rules, and then God would bring judgment. If you had a good king, the good king would maybe promote righteousness, the tearing down of altars and of idols, etc. And today, the most of the leadership, from our perspective, from my perspective, in Israel is secular, and also there. And what I mean is this: even though Israel, the Israeli government, is the most religious in the history of Israel, 75 years, it doesn't mean that they're worshiping Jesus or they're acknowledging Jesus. And so it's crystal clear that if all of them were religious, all of them, again, were 100% Orthodox, that doesn't mean that God accepts them. Because you cannot, Jesus says, there's only one way to the Father, and that's through Him. So until they acknowledge Jesus as the Messiah, they do not have access to the Father. Even though they pray, even though they worship, or whatever, God is not accepting the worship because it's not done through His Son. That's crystal clear. There is no workaround. And so, that being the case, I see the long-term goal of God is going to get them to receive Jesus as their Messiah. And so all of these things that are in motion today, and we see this in the Old Testament. How many times did we see, for example, when Israel was struggling with their enemies, they reached out to Egypt? And God's
That's
like,
true.
why are you looking to Egypt? Look to me. And like Ahaz, right? In Isaiah chapter 7, he wanted to go and the Syro-Ephraimite war. He knows Tiglath-Pileser from Assyria is coming down, but he's looking to Egypt. And God's like, no. I'm not going to let you do that. Yeah. So what we're going to see and what we're seeing now is in Israel's enemies. It's no different than, again, reading the book of Kings or 2 Kings or all of it. Israel's enemies are coming in. They're looking to anybody and everybody to help. They're looking to make alliances, the United States maybe, or even Saudi Arabia. They're looking at all the wrong ways. They're not looking to the God of Israel through Jesus.
However, I would balance that with another statement, and that is, no other people in the history of mankind has a destiny so well marked out as the 12 tribes. Just go to the book of Revelation, and the 12 tribes have a special destiny, even though they make a myriad of mistakes down through history and even to the present moment, as you point out. I always look at the 12 tribes, and I'm cheering them on, tacitly. I'm saying, go Israel, go Israel. And with that is the desire and even the prayer, and I pray for the peace of Jerusalem, as the Bible says. I have the desire to see them come to Christ, to see them open their eyes and to be saved in a very, very open sense of the meaning of that word saved. Wow, do they ever need to be saved? Not just from unbelief, but from the myriad of enemies. I think everybody in the world is against Israel.
Israel has a tremendous future, but what we see is in the meantime, until that future happens, God did this a lot in the Old Testament, where He allowed them to be isolated, He allowed them to be ground down, until they would humble themselves and to seek Him.
Right.
And so I think about Romans 11, where Paul is very sad about Israel's rejection of their Messiah, and then he says, "But look, hey, if they stumble, they didn't fall away, they're not gone, but they tripped. In their tripping over their not reception of Jesus as Messiah, it brought glory to the world. How much more when they get restored will the riches of the world come through Israel?" And so we know their future is bright. But in the meantime, we're living in the age of isolation, increased isolation for Israel. We're living in this age where they haven't repented yet and followed the Lord Jesus. And so we get to watch. It's like being thrust back again into this time frame with the Book of Kings and going, why are the leaders making these decisions? And then the enemies are coming in quicker. And God's like, well, And so here we are watching this, Gary, and as we come, we see them increasingly being, again, we saw them attacked by Hamas. We see Hezbollah on the threat of the north. We see Syria making agreements. Syria is always ready. They've opened up their borders, their bases, their land to receive all those weapons from Iran. And so they're 100% surrounded by even Jordan. Jordan has done a good job lately, but will they stay strong as Israel's kind of semi-partner? Don't know. Even Egypt, come to find out that even though Israel has a peace agreement with Egypt was allowing weapons to flow in through the southern border, the Rafah crossing, and the tunnels, arming Hamas. And that was one of the reasons why they didn't want the tunnels to be found, because they would see that Egypt was complicit in this. So here we are. So let's jump in, Gary, if you don't mind here. Ezekiel 38, let me just preface it by saying there's a lot of disagreement out there about Psalm 83, whether that's the inner ring and that's going to be a war and that's future or not. So I don't want to get into that today. But what is relatively uncontested is Ezekiel 38 is clearly a future war.
Clearly.
Everybody agrees on that. They might not agree on Psalm 83, but they do agree on Ezekiel 38 of being future. And then I remember this. Let me just say this, Gary, that when I first became a Christian, I started reading the Bible, and I had a prophecy Bible, and it was neat. And it said, prophecies to look forward to. And then it said, Ezekiel 38, Russia's going to invade Israel. And so I'm like, what? So I go to Ezekiel 38, I open it up, and I read the whole chapter, and I'm like, I didn't see the word Russia in here. What are they talking about? So I guess that comes, Gary. How in the world is Russia? The Bible doesn't say Russia. Why?
Reading it, and let me read 38, 2 and 3. Okay. Son of man, set thy face against Gog, and I'm reading the King James here, and it said, the land of Magog, Gog, and then with the Hebrew prefix, ma, which means from, Gog, the land of Magog, chief prince of Meshech, and everybody says, well, that sure sounds like Moscow. And Tubal, which certainly sounds like Tobolsk, which are two modern Russian towns. They say, okay, this has got to be Russia. And verse 3 says, and say, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I am against thee, O Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. So there it seems to be laid out. And we discover that they are coming from the north as we read on. So doesn't that speak to you?
Well, what it does is I think one of the things that I learned was that we have our modern names of things, and names change throughout the years. I mean, And Ezekiel is not going to use modern names that we understand for geographical regions. And as I came to understand, he's speaking to regions. He's speaking to geographical areas. He's speaking to them in roughly 600 BC, and he's using the names of those regions back then.
Yeah.
And so our job as historians is to go through and say, okay, let's not look like, for example, one of the examples that you hear is St. Petersburg, Russia versus Leningrad. Well, if you say, in Leningrad, well, it used to be St. Petersburg, then it went to Leningrad, then it goes back to St. Petersburg, and so you're like, okay, if you were to talk about Leningrad and give a prophecy, you'd be like, well, where's Leningrad? There's no Leningrad. But we know that it was changed. The name was changed to, again, from St. Petersburg back and forth, or even Constantinople. Where's that at? Well, that's Istanbul. And so if you spoke about something of Constantinople, you would know now, the writer was speaking about Istanbul. So we have to do our homework. And so you have a lot of these strange names that come right out. And the question is historically looking at them. So let's talk about Gog for a minute, because Gog clearly is the leader here. Gog appears several times in the Bible. It appears again in Revelation 20, which causes a lot of trouble.
Yes.
Because when it talks about the timing of this battle, is it at the end? Which there's no way that it could be. But it tells us that Gog is something other than just a man at a specific time. That it seems to be, especially if you read the Septuagint version, Gog is the power behind the man. And God is speaking to Gog, who is causing this trouble, kind of like Ezekiel 28, where he's speaking to the king of Tyre, and he's speaking to the cherubim, and then Isaiah 14. So anyways, I think Gog ultimately is the spiritual force behind a real person. Gog has a name, is a descendant of Reuben in 1 Chronicles 5. But Gog's this leader. There's a leader. Let's just stop there. Whatever this is, there's a main leader. So is it Zeranovsky?
Well, and he's a bad guy.
He's a bad guy.
Not a good guy.
Nope.
And so starting with that, it's very hard to connect Gog with an actual living human being. We would say, well, it's whoever is the head of the Russian government.
Whoever ends up being that guy is going to be Gog.
It's going to be Gog. And that's what I've always thought. And I really strive not to set dates or to see something that's happening right now as being in the Bible narrative, because you can get in trouble. He's I've figured it out, and I know what's going to happen, and then lo and behold, 2 or 3 years later, oops.
That guy's dead. Next candidate.
It doesn't. So we've got to avoid that.
Mm-hmm.
But what we do have here is a latter-day setting. That I think we can agree on. In other words, now, how do we define latter day? Would that be the time in which we live right now? And I'll just throw that back to you.
Well, what we do know is several times in this passage, which we'll get to, it describes that this battle that will happen in the latter days, in the latter years. It says specifically that it will go up again to the land of Israel, the mountains of Israel, which had long been desolate. And we know that really from about 100 AD, 135 AD, after the Bar Kokhba revolt, all the way until the early 20th century, the early 1900s, the land absolutely was desolate. I mean, we were talking, Mark Twain, I think his book, Citizens Abroad or something like that. Innocents Abroad, yeah. He was out there and he's like, who would want to live here? This place is absolutely disgusting.
He described it as only Mark Twain can do, and I've read Innocents Abroad, and he spared no language to describe how absolutely desolate this place was. And between the words of his writing, you can get a question. And the question he's asking is, has God really abandoned these people who have been called God's chosen people? That was the big question in his mind. And a lot of people have asked that, and then suddenly, after World War II, in 1948 and beyond, where we are right now, the question got answered. No, God has not abandoned his people. And it took an evil act to bring the power of God into focus and to create a modern state of Israel. And so I think based on what we're seeing there, we're saying we don't see Israel being dispersed from this point on. We see a continuum of events that lead us all the way to the book of Revelation. In other words, I don't believe that Israel is going to be scattered again.
Yeah, I'm not persuaded either that they would be completely scattered out of the land for any lengthy period of time. During the tribulation, would they be fleeing and different things? Maybe. And well, for sure they will be. But the key thing here is that we now have a time factor. This prophecy was given 600 BC about a future battle that would happen after a lengthy period of desolation for the land of Israel.
Well, let me read what Ezekiel says in verse 8 of chapter 38. After many years, thou shalt be visited. In the latter years, thou shalt come into the land that's brought back from the sword. And doesn't that ring of today? And is gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel, which have always been waste, but's brought forth out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely, all of them. That word safely, we could talk about.
We're going to have to talk about that word, yes. Yes.
So again, we're just putting together a little kind of a vignette here and trying to clarify the picture. What should we believe about modern Israel, about Gog? Is Gog alive right now? Do we see him on the evening news? And these are the questions I think that plague all Bible-believing Christians.
Yeah, I would say that, well, I think looking historically, that this battle was predicted, and based on the description here, that it would happen certainly post-1948, but most likely post-67, because even though you had in the early 1900s, you had Jewish immigration very strong, going back into the land of Israel. You had them working the land, changing the land that was desolate into a non-desolate, lots of kibbutzim.
Oh, they sell their produce all over Europe.
All over the world, yeah. I mean, it's amazing. You go there now, it's not desolate. I mean, even to the south, they're turning the desert with their drip irrigation systems and stuff into amazing things. So, let's talk about the word safely here. This is the word batach in Hebrew, betach. You got to get the ch in there.
Okay.
But one of my favorite authors is Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum, Messianic Jewish believer. And
oh, yes.
He talks about the meaning of betach. And in some versions, sadly, will say they will be dwelling there in peace. Well, Israel hasn't been in peace since 1948.
True.
And so, but the word betach has the idea of confidently. And we know that today, if you look at Israel, Psalm 20 says that some trust in chariots, but I'll trust in the name of the Lord. Well, Israel doesn't trust in the name of the Lord. They trust in their chariots.
Oh, yeah.
Their Merkava, right? The tanks, which is what the word chariots mean. It's very fascinating. They are dwelling very confidently. Israel says, even Netanyahu today, we don't need anybody. If we're going to do it, we'll do it ourselves. We don't need any other nations to protect us. If we need to go after Iran, we'll do it alone. They're trusting confidently in their own military strength.
And that's the history. I mean, if you pick up the Bible and start looking at the Old Testament and track the 12 tribes from Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and on, and that is characteristic of the 12 tribes.
Yep.
Very confident. And always saved at the last minute. It's a recurring story. And I see that today because, and this kind of brings us to where I think we wanted to focus on today. We see Israel as having very confidently defended itself. And in spite of the fact that the UAE and Turkey and Iraq and Iran and so on, so you have the gathering enemy boasting about the power of his weapons and saying we're going to this time for sure we're going to wipe out the tribes. Israel will be no more. There won't even be a land of Israel when we get through. And they're saying it openly. So you would think that the Israelis would react by saying, we have to bow down before the Lord, and we have to prostrate ourselves before Him and ask Him to intercede for us. It's not really what's happening. This is becoming a military battle of the first mark and atomic weapons. And there are rumors galore about which atomic weapons the Israelis have and which atomic weapons the Iranians have. And everybody is looking for a very, very dark period of war in which perhaps hundreds of thousands of people die. And we don't want to see that. But what does the Bible say? As you read on through Ezekiel 38, Israel is not wiped out. In fact, they're victorious. And we don't have time to read the whole thing and go to the end, but I'm just saying. Israel is going to miraculously survive this current aggression.
Yeah, and I would say that God is victorious in this. Like typical, I think back to Hezekiah when Sennacherib came and really destroyed or conquered all of the cities of Judah, many of them. It's in historical secular records.
Yes.
And so imagine, being Hezekiah living there, and you see your entire country get annihilated by the enemy, get overwhelmed, and then here you are now, and Hezekiah just goes before the Lord, or Jehoshaphat. I mean, same thing. He puts the letter with all these threats. He puts it before the Lord and says, "Here we are." But again, what you just said, right now, all of the surrounding places of Israel, again, you have these terrorist attacks. They have not seeking the Lord on these.
They are not.
They're seeking their own military strength.
Well, let me run something else past you here. Again, we're looking at Ezekiel 38, and here in verse 5, it names some enemies: Persia, Ethiopia, Libya, with them, and the them would be Gog and his forces, and Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the north quarters, and all his bands, and many people with thee. So you go from Libya, which is North Africa, to the house of Togarmah, which I understand to be modern Turkey, extending all the way over to the Caspian Sea, which pretty much covers Israel's northern flank, and also is boasting right now about having nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. And Recep Tayyip Erdogan is no friend of Israel. Erdogan is plotting and planning with the Iranians and others in good time to invade from the north, which pretty much describes Ezekiel 38. It's talking about the far north. It's talking about Turkey, the house of Togarmah, and I really do believe that that's what it is. And then Iraq and Iran and other enemies of Israel, and you have a full-blown world war. Is that going to happen soon?
Well, if you would have said, "Is that going to happen?" I would say yes. Soon.
I put the word soon.
You did put the word soon. I think yes, because Jesus said He was coming soon. So there's a little bit of ambiguity there that we could say it. But I think if we look at these players, there's no doubt Magog refers to the ancient Scythian or Scythian, depending on how you want to pronounce it for some, empire, which is the southern steppes of Russia. I mean, going all the way from Ukraine, eastern Ukraine, all the way over towards all the stands. And so the southern steppes of Russia is clearly the land of Magog. And so you have this leader. This is why most people think about Russia and its leadership. I mean, back in the 90s, there was a book called Zhirinovsky. Vladimir Zhirinovsky, The Man Who Would Be Gog. So this was prior to Putin coming along the scene. But as you said, that guy came and went, and now we have Putin as Putin Gog. We don't really know. But what we do know is that most likely the person that's going to lead the charge is this guy Gog from the land of Magog, which is the land of, again, Russia or southern Russia. And so you have, as you mentioned, Meshach and Tubal and Gomer, these other localities which are clearly in reference to Turkey, northern Turkey, going down eastern Turkey into Armenia, over towards the Caspian Sea, the Caucasus region. And so you have a variety of names here that are referring to all these relatively minor tribal groups, but all seem to be focused around, again, from even Germany. Some people, especially in the Jewish writings in the Talmud, Gomer is a reference to Germany. So if you go Germany down through Ukraine, down into the modern-day Turkey, all the way over Armenia, certainly to Persia, which we know is Iran. Cush is interesting too, because Cush has two different etymologies to it. One of them is to the land in Ethiopia, in the middle of Africa, which I don't know, I'm a little skeptical about that. But the other Cush, there's another Cush that is in the land near Iran today. So could it be, I would tend to lean that it's probably more towards the Iranian connection, the Persia, because it's listed right next to Persia, and then Cush, which could be there. And then Put is almost certainly northern Africa, Libya, Algeria. So you have this coalition of Russia, at least, Turkey, Persia, Iran, the trifecta for sure. And then you have these other ancillary groups that are part of it, which could include all the way into Germany, surprisingly. But you have the Bet Togarmah as well into Turkey. All of them come down to a coalition that is seeking to go and to attack Israel. And we see in verse 10 of Ezekiel 38 about why. Why are they coming down to the land of Israel? And God says that he will put hooks in the jaws of Gog. He will turn him around and bring him down because he's going to have these thoughts, this evil plan.
It's against their will in a way. In other words, just looking at Vladimir Putin today, he's a very safe. He's a wealthy man. He's kind of a king, a modern king. And he's just as comfy as he can possibly be. Why should he, expose himself to all this storm and this misery when he can just sit and enjoy his wealth? But bit by bit, I think that the Ukrainian battle has kind of loosened that up a little bit.
Contributing to this whole scenario.
To the scenario that's going to move him south. And then we have the Turks. And Erdogan is very much war-minded. And then you go farther south and down to Kush and Put, and you go down to the UAE today. Do they want to fight? Hey, they've got all the money in the world, all the oil in the world, and they're just as happy as larks. Why should we get into a war and destroy our comfy lives? We're building all these skyscrapers. We're having a wonderful world. But God says, I'm going to bring these people. And it's almost as though he says, against their will. And they're going to attack Israel. In some ways, it's not against their will, though. There are a lot of people who'd like to wipe out Israel completely. But here's something that I wanted to run past you. Verse 11 says, Gog is going to say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls, having neither bars nor gates. That perfectly describes northern Israel today. Unwalled villages, farmers happily farming, raising fruit and vegetables and all kinds of things, just having a great time until October 7th. And suddenly they've had to abandon northern Israel in large part. The farmers can't farm anymore. And what do you have up in northern Israel? You have unwalled villages. So again, we find something in the Bible that opens up an idea.
I think this is amazing too because when this can be confusing in the modern situation because we do have a barrier wall between Jerusalem and many parts of what is known as the West Bank, and it's a security wall, but it's not a full wall for sure. When you go down to Bethlehem, you can see this wall there in the main areas for terrorist reasons. But I don't think the fact that there's that wall there, it's not walling a village. It's just a barrier wall. And here it's specifically talking about unwalled villages.
Right.
Well, if you go back to Ezekiel's day, it was common in ancient times and ancient warfare that certainly people lived out in the countryside. But the big cities, I think about Lachish and Azekah and Jerusalem and Hatzor in the north, Tel Gezer, Gath. All these places were walled. They were walled. They had a circular wall. That's a tell. And so Ezekiel's speaking in a time when you looked around at all the major villages, they were all walled up because that's how you protected yourself. But today, as we know, you can drive around Israel, and besides that little bit of a border wall, 100% of the villages are unwalled. And so what he's saying here would be, I think about what, in Ezekiel's time, for him to say this, people will be like, what are you talking about? How could you have a whole bunch of unwalled villages? That's impossible for security reasons. But yet, that's exactly what we see today.
It is.
These unwalled villages.
Let me run one more thing past you, and I'd like your opinion on this. You come down to verse 13, and we have some entities named here: Sheba, Dedan, and the merchants of Tarshish, with the young lions thereof, will say unto thee. In other words, they'll ask Gog a question, and the question is, are you come to take a spoil, to take a prey? In other words, we have some big power. Sheba, Dedan, I think probably the United Arab Emirates would fit into that. I'm not sure. And the merchants of Tarshish. America might fit into that description as one of the merchants of Tarshish, because Tarshish is the far west from the Holy Land or from the Mediterranean area. And so we have this group asking a question. Why are you coming down here and attacking Israel? What's going on here?
I find it absolutely fascinating that Sheba and Dedan is almost universally described as being Saudi Arabia or the Saudi Arabian Peninsula, which will include the UAE and others. So you have that, the Sheba and Dedan. And then it says, the merchants of Tarshish and all their young lions. So the question where you mentioned possibly America involved here is there's two things. One is that these people are not involved in the war.
Right.
They specifically are standing, away and providing a protest. So this is like United Nations protest here.
Yeah.
So I find it fascinating that they are unwilling to get involved, but they are willing to protest. And so when we think about Sheba and Dedan, clearly right now, this seems very prophetic because the evil axis, in this case, Russia, Turkey, and Iran as the main players, are generally opposite of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the largest Sunni Muslim population. Mecca, Medina are there. And then you have the Shiite crescent, which would include Iran, for sure, going around. They want their own caliphate. And so, and even as much as Turkey might be its own Sunni brand, they definitely are in competition with Saudi Arabia. So if you have a religious component here, which I find fascinating, that you have Sheba and Dedan, this Sunni Muslim, I would say, contingent protesting because one of the biggest things that Saudi Arabia has been fearful of is the advancement of Iran, or Persia in this case. And so are they seeing, hey, are they coming down? Now they're coming into our area. Are they going to keep coming into maybe the Saudi Arabian area? So it's right for them.
And
Now,
that would be devastating because the Saudis are dedicated to being wealthy, being stable, being rich, and building larger and larger cities.
absolutely. They're building the big city down in the desert right now, 185 kilometers long.
Yeah.
It'll be it's, 15-minute city, but it's very technological. But let me go back to Tarshish and their young lions. So Tarshish is often thought of as being Spain, far western Mediterranean basin,
Right.
or even as far as Britain. So because you have other metals, tin and others coming out of Britain, which would be considered, at least in ancient etymological
Well,
words.
could we define the word Tarshish as Western,
Yeah, I think.
like Western nations?
Yeah, Western, and then, well, this is what some people speculate, and it's speculation, is if you have Britain as Tarshish, it says Tarshish and all their young lions.
Yes.
So the young lions, and if we think about it, America is a very young nation
That's
as it
true.
relates to any of these other countries.
And we came from Britain.
We did. So it's a possessive. They're young lions. So is this referring to a diplomatic protest by the West, as you mentioned, Britain, maybe the United States or other British empire countries?
Yeah.
So it could, but it's interesting that what we do see in Ezekiel 38, somehow, some way, Israel's alone. Israel is not being defended by the United States, by Saudi Arabia, anybody else, which again, as we watch things develop right now, the United States is continually isolating Israel. They're working behind the scenes against Israel. So
Right.
this, when you talk about soon, Gary, how soon, I don't know, but it seems a foundation is being laid here.
There are so many elements in what we have just looked at, and we've only taken a very cursory glance at what's going on here. Lots of things happening, and they all seem to be, in some almost indistinguishable way, happening right now. And we're trying to put the pieces together of that proverbial puzzle. You know, that good old 1,000-piece puzzle that you used to buy, and lay it out on the dining room table and you start putting pieces in. That's what we're doing right now. The pieces are there, and you can look at some of them and you can say, wow,
Where does this fit?
it certainly looks like something I can see right now. And I think that's the beauty of Ezekiel 38. We cannot definitively make a statement and say, this means such and such. We can't do that. However, we can say there are certain things happening right now that remind us very, very strongly of Ezekiel 38.
I think that when we come to, if we approach it, Ezekiel 30 as in the sense of the war, that's one thing. But there are a couple things here that we've talked about that stand out, where it's talking about, in verse 12, to take plunder, to stretch out your hand against waste places that are again inhabited, and against the people gathered from the nations who have acquired livestock and goods, who dwell in the midst of the land.
Yes.
And so you have in verse 7 or verse 8, in the latter years you'll come into a land that has been brought back from the sword and gathered from many people on the mountains of Israel, which had long been desolate. They were brought out of the nations, and now all of them dwell securely. So at what we know 100%, which is not speculative, is that Ezekiel prophesies about the people of Israel being taken away into the nations, the land lying desolate for a long period of time, 1,800 years, and then the people coming back into the land, onto the mountains of Israel, and the land not being desolate anymore. This is prophecy having been 100% fulfilled in our present day. Now, that's the nation of Israel part. The war part, now we're seeing the stage setting for that.
Yes. Now, we're about out of time,
We're
but
about
I'm
out
going
of
to
time.
leave you with this one. This is verse 16. And thou shalt come up against my people of Israel. What a phrase that is, my people of Israel. As a cloud to cover the land, it shall be in the latter days, and I will bring you up against the land, that the heathen may know me when I shall be sanctified in thee, O Gog, before their eyes. So there are two things I want to ask you about, and we can close with this. One is the phrase latter days, and the other end is O Gog. It starts with Gog, ends with Gog, and it's in the latter days. What are these latter days?
Yeah, I think that this is clearly, when Ezekiel's writing this, it's similar to the book of Daniel. Daniel and Ezekiel were they're contemporaries of one another. They both use similar language, Daniel chapter 12, and here about the latter times, about the latter days. And so I think what he's talking about is the end of time, the end of what we normally understand in the sense of the latter days. Now, we know the last days began ultimately with Jesus when he left and ascended into heaven, but we're in the latter years of the end, latter years, if you wanted to say it that way. And so I think you have two things, that you have this enemy, because we know other places he says, are you the one that my prophet has spoken of before about Gog? And so Gog is this enemy of Israel that has been around for a while, not going anywhere, and will return again, as we see in Revelation 20 at the end of the millennium. But God is saying, we're going to have a little face-off here, O Gog. You're going to come up against my people in my land, and the nations are going to watch, and I'm going to be sanctified and hallowed in the sight of all of them, and we're going to have this battle, because you're going to come up and you're going to try to destroy them in the latter years. And so here we are, Gary. To me, it's fascinating that the time we're living in, this isn't guesswork. We're not making this up. This is straightforward reading of the text. It's saying what it's saying, and when we look out, we see the evidence of all of this. Part of it's already done. It's been fulfilled in 1948 and 1967.
Sure.
Now we're just looking for the rest of it to be fulfilled in a very literal, normal way.
Final question. Are we living in these latter days? And if so, how should that affect the way we read the Bible and the way we look at life?
I think that we can say 100% with certainty that we're living in the latter days because, according to this text, in the latter years, Israel will come back, the mountains will not be desolate, the people will be dwelling confidently and securely. We're there. So because and the fact of the matter, Gary, because we've seen that start in 1948, it's been 75 years.
Yeah.
So really the latter years started at the minimum in 1948, and now we're 75 years later, which means we're even closer to the end of that latter years period.
All I can say, Mondo, this is exciting. I've really enjoyed talking with you. I mean, and it makes me want to go back and reread for the umpteenth time Ezekiel 38, because you can never read it enough. Every time you look at it, a new idea comes into your head, and we can't be definitive about times and dates, but hey, places, yeah, there are a lot of places mentioned here, and including Turkey, I believe. This thing that we talked about, the House of Togarmah, and Erdogan is in the news these days. Constantly. And that's all I'm going to say.
Well, we appreciate, thank you, Gary, and we appreciate all of you listening to this, kind of an introduction to the players of Ezekiel 38, but also not just an introduction, but a pronouncement that prophecy absolutely has been fulfilled, and that's exciting. And this is what reveals to us that the Word of God is true, and ultimately this points to the validity and the absolute accuracy of Jesus being the Messiah. He's the Son of the living God. It was through him that salvation is being offered to everybody. And that to me, prophecy is very much a defense of that truth, that salvation is only found through him. So appreciate you listening today. Again, if you haven't subscribed, please do. And also check us out at christmasinbranson.com for our upcoming conference, which will be pretty fun and exciting in a great place. And so thanks for listening, Gary. For Gary and myself, we'll catch you next time.